given our academic and activist backgrounds, like we're completely in alignment with having deep roots to what we're creating, having, a solid foundation. And at the same time, understanding that the spaces that we moved in for so long, as electrifying and as exciting as it was, being academics, working with students, working within that system, there was so much negativity. I just started seeing how much people were shutting down, how even in my own life, becoming an academic in many ways shut down the full range of my creativity. I realized my talents are better used elsewhere.
And here we are, another episode of Academics Mean Business. Today, whoop, whoop, I have Dr. Melanie Klein hanging out with us. And guys, we have to have a part two. I don't know when it's happening, but you'll hear at the end of the episode. We just need to have some conversations because she is a fellow sociologist and community college professor who was teaching for about 18 months in her tenure track position and decided to leave. So we're very similar. And we met through a community that has come up over and over on this podcast, which is Unfair Advantage with Chris Winfield. I've had guest after guest. And Dr. Melanie Klein, that's how we met. And it's pretty funny. I used to follow her on Twitter. So you'll hear a little bit about that story, but she kind of, because she was, in Twitter and doing that whole scene 11, 12 years ago, she's always had the seed of wanting to be a public intellectual. And so the idea to leave the academy, it always felt like she wasn't perfectly fitting in there either, that she believed that the information and the stuff she was talking with and the discussions she was having with her students belonged out in the world. And so she saw herself as that bridge. So her work was in media and representation in the media, and of course, intersectionality and oppression and how that all plays in the stories and images that we see online and in our movies and all of that. And so she name drops here, and it's so beautiful because I use the same resources online. I use the same things in my classroom. So it was I'm just like, oh, I felt like I was talking to a mirror of myself or something. It was really cool. And we also get into the work she's doing now with Mark Cardone, who's actually another previous guest. So you'll hear all about their project that they're working on together and their partnership. It was just an amazing conversation. I really hope you enjoy this one. It was almost as if we could have gone on for another 20 or 30 minutes, but she did have a hard stop. So that is why we had to cut the conversation, because folks, I would have brought it. I would have brought all of it. So yes, we will continue this conversation. We'll add an ellipses at the end, but enjoy this one and make sure you hit up Melanie all over social media and follow her because she does amazing, amazing work. And here we are with Dr. Melanie Klein. Welcome, Melanie. I'm so glad that you're on Academics Mean Business.
Thanks for having me, Lindsay. I have been super excited all week to have this conversation with you.
Me too. So for the listeners, for you out there listening, Melanie and I had a recent conversation, 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, about a month probably. Mm-hmm. And we've been circling each other a while. And I've brought up Unfair Advantage and Chris Winfield probably a lot on this podcast. But that's the community that is actually surprisingly connecting us. And it's really funny, looking back, because I remember seeing your name come up in the group. It's a small community right now, and it's around marketing and publicity for your stuff. And it's really great. And also networking and stuff like that. And so it's a small, less than 200 person Facebook group or something. And I remember seeing her name come up and I was like, is that the Melanie Klein I used to follow on Twitter? And it was a thought I had. And then I was like, okay, I'm just it might be. And then I think I was like, I should reach out. And then finally, it wasn't even Mark that connected us, a past guest. It was someone else, right?
It was Jesse Johnson.
You guys need to talk. Jesse, yes. Jesse Johnson, who's also a member of the community, who I should probably have on for sure. But yeah, so Jesse connected us and I was like, oh my God, yes. What? Why haven't we talked? And I'm so glad she did that. So here we are, full circle. Such a cool moment. I love it.
It is. And when we got on the phone last month and you remembered my Twitter account, Feminist Cow, I went, oh my God. I mean, that honestly was a really poignant moment, given the fact that I will point out that probably 11 or 12 years ago, I had this awakening in me in terms of, I really have always wanted to position myself as a public intellectual. And it was right around that time that there were a lot of young feminists who were creating content. So, for example, this was shortly after, feministing was created as a platform. And I would look around at a lot of the work that people were doing and think to myself, oh my goodness, this is the work I'm doing. And I know that what is happening in my classroom is meant to really surpass these walls. And one of my good friends was doing a lot of social media work in terms of teaching people how to use it, because I know 12 years doesn't seem like that long ago, but that was really around the time that people were starting to get on Facebook and were starting to
beginning
use
of
things
Twitter,
like Twitter. And I remember when we sat down and she showed me how Twitter worked, I had this very sort of clear, visceral response in my body, like, oh, I understand. And I started using Twitter to really build everything that has happened now. And oftentimes I tell people Twitter truly was the game changer for me and allowed me to connect with communities all over the country, and not all over the country, but also all over the world. And so when I, sit here today and I look at all of the things that I've done and the people I've connected to, really, it was Twitter that opened up that space for me. And so it feels really fitting that you and I are having this conversation and you remember that, like we can go back that far, that there was a certain amount of visibility that platform created for me.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I've also had some guests on the show who do social media for like higher ed. Like Josie Alquist is one. And then Dr. Kate is another who like actually helps academics with their social media. She's like, if you're not on there being public with your work, no conferences are going to find you. Like, it's like an active thing that you can be a part of. So, but it's cool because you're old school, like you're OG using it. And that's how I felt I was too. I was on Twitter as an observer and not really a producer or creator, which is okay too. And I did bring it in my classroom a little bit, but more as look at how we can kind of learn about different communities in this space. Look how we can, look how it impacts like news and what we take in and what we consume. And I found a lot of like kind of underground podcasts and underground news as it related to, what was going on with obviously the recession and the market crash. And so that was a big, Twitter was a great source of like collated information for me that I, exactly like you said, could bring into my classroom versus, I don't know, the other way of me trying to search for it. It was like Twitter was, oh, this is happening in this community. This is happening in this community. And it felt like I was actually had a feed of current things versus me having to go out and find them. I don't know if that even makes sense.
But
that's how I was using it. Yeah. So it was very academic to me. And it is interesting now because I think Twitter has evolved and it, may not be one of the faster growing, new kid on the block thing, but I still feel like it does a really good job of accomplishing exactly what you and I are talking about still, for sure.
I agree. I mean, I'll be really honest. I don't tend to use that as much anymore. But I give all the props to Twitter for opening up that space. And like you said, for me, it was also the same experience. It was a very personally tailored, curated place for me to find not only information that I was definitely pulling into my classes, especially around social movements and social change, seeing how social media played a role, with the various hashtags and bringing people together. That was a huge thing that I've always covered in my pop culture classes, but also finding other people doing similar work, finding connections, building communities virtually, and then having those virtual relationships culminate in real life. I think the first time that I met Anita Sarkeesian from Feminist Frequency. She had followed me on Twitter. This was
Oh my
in
gosh, I
her
forgot
early
about her.
days before the whole Gamergate thing went down. And, shortly after that happened, she was coming into LA. I had never actually met her in person before. And the first time I did, she spent like 3 days at my house.
Oh my God, that's so cool.
And I've had that
How
happen
funny.
a lot of times where, those relationships from Twitter turned into they've been long now, deep, sustaining and meaningful relationships and communities. So I love that. And for me,
Yeah.
I'll say that after that one quote lesson that I received, it seemed so commonsensical to me how to use it. I was really kind of surprised other people didn't. And people started asking me to teach workshops on how to harness social media to create more visibility. And I always thought, like, doesn't everybody already know this? And
No.
and I was like, no, actually, we don't. And so I've done some of that, not just for academics, but for others. But I will say, for me, it wasn't even so much that I wanted to position myself as an academic and find conferences and other things. For me, it was creating the bridge between that particular identity and what I knew from the beginning of my work was really my true identity, which was as a public intellectual. And Mark Cordone, who's been a previous guest of yours, he and I have that conversation all the time. We have similar backgrounds in terms of social justice and movement building, intersectionality, and how these are really frameworks and concepts that need to extend far beyond the walls of academia and far beyond the walls of the classroom. And, for me, one of my big role models has always been Bell Hooks, how she positioned herself as a public intellectual and wrote in a way and created content in such a way that, the average person who is not in grad school, the average person who maybe doesn't have the privilege of enrolling in a college classroom can be exposed to those ideas. And I knew literally from the minute I walked into my first classroom as a professor that this was just really one small component of the work that I was meant to do.
I love it. I love it. And I think that's a really, let's talk about what you studied and kind of your background a little bit. And if you want to paint a picture of what your career has kind of looked like. And then I definitely want to tap back into this idea of going outside the classroom. And it sounds like it's been a thread in your teaching. And so, so start us there. Start us with your academic background, what you studied, if you want to talk about your research a little bit, any of that.
Absolutely. So my first sort of entree point was my Sociology of Women class that I took at the local community college here in LA. I went to LA Valley College and had this incredible experience with my first mentor, where, my life made sense in that moment when I walked in that door. As a woman who moved here from another country, as a woman who didn't speak the language when I got here, as a woman from a, blue collar background whose parents did not go to college, and was also dealing with some very stark class differences in the schools that I went to, as well as dealing with very specific experiences that too many women experience in terms of abusive relationships, rape, abortion, shame around sexuality, low self-esteem around intellect and capability and efficacy. When I walked into that Sociology of Women class, the entire framework of my life fell into a new position where I always say that the personal guilt and shame and blame that I had carried around, thinking that, oh, well, these things that I've gone through, the things that I've experienced are personal shortcomings. They are evidence of my own lack of ability. They are evidence of, some sort of individual shortcoming. As C. Wright Mills, of course, talks about the sociological imagination, is I could see my personal life, my individual biography is intersecting with the time and place in which I existed. And I started learning about the structures and systems that are our framework. So we're talking about, white supremacy, talking about capitalism, patriarchy, an ableist and a homophobic society. And so I was able to let go of that shame and move into a place of empowerment, at the same time being very angry about the entire thing, because I saw all of the statistics that I was not alone. And so while I felt liberated, as Gloria Steinem would say, I also felt incredibly pissed off. And so at that moment, I was very clear that this is the realm or the area I wanted to go to. So I went from being an art major to shifting to sociology, both for undergrad and grad school. And my areas in undergrad, I spent a lot of time studying Marxism and, looking at social class and class movements. I was really into the Industrial Revolution. That was really fascinating for me. Fordism, scientific management. And then as I moved on, the real focus was gender, but not gender alone. It was an intersectional feminist framework. So looking at how, these systems of oppression intersect and overlap, looking at gender, race, and class, as well as all of the other isms. There was a lot on contemporary body image politics, as well as media literacy education. So understanding how mainstream media operates and then having the ability to create alternative sources of media, which, that's a bridge to why social media appealed to me, is like, how can we bypass media gatekeepers, create our own content, and sort of, restructure or reframe the culture that we live in, because, we are the creators, yet we don't believe that we are. So we feel powerless. And so my work has been about reminding people that we are the architects of this and that we can recreate it. And so all of those things were, kind of came together in my work. And I always like to say truly was about raising consciousness. And so if I wanted to choose one, buzzword, if you will, about my work in sociology and, media literacy and feminism, all of them were really about how can we dismantle, these systems of oppression externally, but how can we also deal with our internalized oppression? How can we decolonize our minds? And so that really became the crux of my work, and was hired first as a sociologist, was teaching research classes on race relations, gender. I did a lot of work on interracial relationships, did a lot of social distance scale kinds of things, but also did a lot of work on media. That really became a big focal point of mine because of the level of saturation that we have as a mediated culture. And I felt that if I really wanted to create change that was looking at racism, looking at sexism, looking at homophobia, a really great path to addressing all of that was by addressing representation in media. So that became the big focal point in all the different ways that I've worked since then.
Yes, I love it. And it's funny because that's where I think so much of our paths cross. Like I think I wrote to Mark, I was like, she's my soul sister. She's like my fellow sociologist who is just as, crazy as I am. Like, and it just feels so like, just even talking about this right now it makes me miss my classroom, but it's funny because I was very similar. Like it was all about the media and representation. And I would love to hear your thoughts on 10, 15 years ago when you were doing that kind of work and what you're seeing now, because I think social media has really empowered mainstream society to actually start questioning things like privilege and representation. It's because of the voices that have been marginalized and quieted for so long found these platforms to really build an audience. And I know early day, like blogging, a lot of women were blogging as men. And there's, a lot of people weren't talking about their sexuality in order to, and you brought up kind of Gamergate and stuff, because being a woman on the internet is a thing, right? And so, I've noticed though, there's a lot. Now we're seeing, movements really, we witnessed a lot. I mean, we both were teaching during Occupy, which I know was probably huge in your classroom as it was in mine, and thinking about how social media had an impact. But I was thinking about like, it is pretty different. It's not like it's perfect, but, 10 years ago, it's like for me to exit the classroom when I can see what change has happened. I remember when I would, I still left teaching about Occupy. And, we talked about how some students had no idea what it was, right? And just being like, well, where were you? What do you remember? And some people were just like, I had no idea. And I was like, I can just remember how every day in my class, like teaching that semester was such a different semester as a sociologist. And it was amazing. And thrilling and scary, but like now it's like fading. And I was like, are there people still teaching it? Like, I don't know. Sorry. I'm just thinking about myself in the classroom and talking about this and being like, oh, you might actually understand what I'm talking
absolutely.
about.
No, I do.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on like currently what's happening and connect it to maybe not being in the classroom anymore? Because we can obviously get to that too.
Yeah. So there's a lot of good stuff there. I mean, the first thing I want to say is that if I think back to 10 or 15 years ago, that we were just starting to have, these sort of platforms. It's nothing like what so many people take for granted today.
Yeah, they called Barack Obama like the first Twitter president. Do you remember that? Like, yeah. So it was so interesting. And he was like the BlackBerry president, which now is just like hilarious.
Well, and that's the thing. It's similar to Kennedy, right? I mean, it's very well documented, whether it's in social classes or political science classes or comm classes, that had we not had the invention of television in 1942, which, became a household commodity by the time we get to the early 50s, late 40s, early 50s, more than likely John F. Kennedy would not have won that election.
Wouldn't have been president. Yeah.
We had that audiovisual component. And when I think about sort of representation, I think about stories, I think about, the kind of movies that are being made. I sit back and there is this profound sense of satisfaction. That is not to say by any stretch that there's anything complete. I always talk about the fact that there's a difference between equality and progress, and the progress that we've made by no means should signal to anyone that the work is done or that we should lessen our efforts. It just simply means that change is happening, and doesn't mean it's all perfect, but the fact that it's been a profound shift. I was on the plane coming home from Germany over the summer, and I watched that movie Cock Blockers with John Cena and a few others.
Interesting.
And I remember thinking to myself, oh, this is going to be so bad. I'm going to hate this movie. It's going to be absolutely terrible. And Lindsay, I thought to myself, these characters are so well developed. There is so much diversity in these female characters, the storylines, the relationships.
Nice.
I was really impressed. And I just thought to myself, this is the culmination of all of the incredible activists and allies and academics that I've worked with for the last 15 to 20 years, who, we've been on the ground, like in the trenches, completely, these have been on the ground movements. And now to, on a longitudinal scale, to see the manifestation is just so profound for me. I mean, we have the former, one of the former editors of Feministing, who's now, over at Teen Vogue. Jessica Valente is doing so many other new things. If we think about what Lisa Wade has done with sociological images and her work on hookup culture, and the ways that this information has left the classroom and left just activist spaces, which were also in many ways, I would say, confined spaces, to the masses, and the use of hashtags that we've been able to mobilize. And if we even think about Oscars So White, and we think about Me Too and Time's Up, it's the social media has allowed this to happen. And so as a media literacy scholar and a sociologist that, really is taking an intersectional framework as my foundation, I am definitely always critiquing. I am always, poking holes in things, but I also really make an attempt not to let all of the successes and all of the wins go by us, because there have been an incredible amount of wins, even talking about, my friend Anita Sarkeesian with what she's done around, with Reddit and Gamergate and bringing women's stories to the forefront. This has all happened over, a 15-year period. And we're just kind of seeing the exponential progress in the last 3 years. So to some people it might seem like, oh, this is just something new. It's been happening in the last 2-3 years, which is not true. It's sort of, it began 15 years ago, I would say, in earnest. And then there's been this acceleration process. So I think about high school students now who have very different representations that they're seeing. They're getting different storylines. And I see that in the classroom, because even though, my work has shifted in the last few years, and we'll get into that, I still feel a deep call to serve in the classroom. So I keep 2 on the ground classes currently to continue to inspire and to motivate in those spaces. And at the beginning of the semester, when I asked people to, raise their hands, if they knew about certain topics or issues, or even if they identified as a feminist, the number of hands had exponentially increased over the last 5 years.
Yep.
Like exponential increase. And so it's just a really inspiring, motivating, and affirming experience for me to have, that these changes that sometimes can feel so arduous and draining actually have reaped incredible results. I mean, the last year's award season was so drastically different from anything I've ever experienced.
Yep. Wasn't it amazing? And that's the part that makes me miss teaching, is I feel like I've lost my pulse on that. I mean, I'm out of the classroom 2 years now, like this December. So my last semester was 2 years ago right now. And part of me feels like I've lost that as like what you're kind of describing it as, like this, I don't know if it's not like standard, but it's like a reference point. Like I don't have that reference point. And it's interesting. And I guess it's just because my focus has shifted to other things, because now I'm, and we could talk about this, about diversity and inclusion and social justice in this entrepreneur space, which is an interesting conversation to have as well. But yeah, I'm finding that part of me misses just that on the ground thing, like how you kind of referenced it as being on the ground and being tapped into that. But at the same time, I know my focus, it felt like that was hard for me to do both. And I don't know, like I see myself going back to having maybe 1 or 2 classes, like a night class or something like that. But at the moment, it feels like a little too much. But yeah, I appreciate hearing that. And that part of me just wanted to go like, oh, like, what are you thinking about things, like just to kind of, department meeting chat or something like that.
Yeah. And I will say, it hasn't been easy for me. I just, resigned from a tenure track job, which was presented as the holy grail. And it was something that I had wanted for a really long time. And I was there 18 months and had the realization like, oh, great. So I have this now, but it was very clear that that's not what I was meant to do. And yet at the same time, I fully understood that I did not want to let go of all my classes. And that could change, right? I feel that could definitely change. But for the time being, for this moment that we're having this conversation, I can certainly say that for me to be in both worlds, doing this work in multiple ways, is really beneficial for me, feels very gratifying and fulfilling. And I feel right now that they're necessary. But at the same time, the pull to work with private clients, to work with thought leaders and influencers and game changers to help them with their mindset, to deal with their own sort of, blocks around, their sense of worth and value for certain kinds of women, maybe body confidence things, knowing that if I can work with these individuals on this level, it's going to change the content and the work that they produce and actually reach millions of more people. Has been the motivational piece to even, let go of the classroom at all, because that has always been my jam. That is where I have felt the most alive and electrified. And so right now I'm definitely, most of my work is in the private client realm and content creation on a more massive scale. But having that anchor, having a few moments in the classroom each week and really coming with these young students who are going to also take the seeds of what happens in the classroom out into all of the areas that they're going to venture into, still feels really right. It feels really right. I love it, because they do keep me very tapped into what's happening, and I can see the sort of effects, and we can have these conversations in a way that might be different, let's say, than on another podcast or in a different entrepreneurial space. And definitely the intellect in me very deeply desires and craves these kinds of conversations, which is why, to be quite honest, and we were talking, prior to our interview just now, being partnered, and I'm talking about like in personal life and professional life with Mark, has been like the perfect union. It's like, oh, fantastic. We can go ahead and kill it in this entrepreneurial space, but our values, our sense of integrity, the joint work that we've done around social justice and consciousness raising and community building is a real opportunity for us to bring that into the spaces that you're describing now. How can we bring this more onto entrepreneurial spaces? And so we specifically have been working on the Joy Revolution together, where we're pairing his background in positive psychology, mine in sociology and intersectional feminism.
Love it.
With mindfulness and allowing that to educate and inspire people who have a lot of power, who have a lot of resources, to refine their work, refine their perspective, grow their own personal joy capacity, and at the same time serve their communities in a new way. And we're talking about like legacy building here. And having them think about that kind of work in a new way. So I oftentimes describe it as, we are working from the bottom up and the top down, and we're meeting in the center as a collective.
Oh, I love it. Only a sociologist would say it like that. I love it. And it's been so fun to witness too, just like, what you guys are doing in the Joy Revolution. And also I think like what this podcast represents, like what, like I've been like trying to make happen. It's like, this is where like when the intellectual meets like the public and meets, capitalism, right? And like, we can like with the systems that we have like right now because we're like conscious of it. And that's been what has got me through like being an entrepreneur. And I know you brought out Marx, you brought up Carl a little bit ago. And, what I taught and when I would talk about class and when I would talk about the economy and all of that, I sit back and be like, oh my gosh, I make money and I pay people and I have to do, and it's just like this mind flip, but also it's so fun to be a sociologist because I can just like zoom out and be like, oh, here are the trends that are happening and just can like see it mapped out. And it's such a cool, I feel so much more in control where I felt when I was teaching, it was more, I was like explaining how the structures work. Now I actually feel like I'm impacting the structure.
Oh, can I just pause on that and say, golden,
like, right? And so I'm curious, like, because I think you're the first sociologist that I've had on the show. I'm pretty positive. And if I'm not remembering this, that's dangerous. I think I was in someone else I have on my list, but yeah. And so like part of me is like, that's why I've always like felt like I've done pretty good with marketing because I kind of get it, right? Like we studied it and we're like, what does divergence and like disruption look like? And what is like mainstream? Like, and I can play with that and I get it. Like I see what's happening. And so watching you two create something like the Joy Revolution and your like academic flags are like waving high, but you're selling that shit out, you're charging money for it. And like people are loving it. And there's research behind it. I'm like, this is what the space needs. Like no more of this, like making stuff up or like just like pretending that just because you did it, that's how everyone should do it, which has made me bonkers. So anyways, I just have been watching being like, this is so rad, just seeing. And so you unifying, I think is what made it more like real, like, oh, like two people running, potentially a business together, like we were talking about, but like also, yeah, just this program. And I was like, dude, that's dangerous. And I'm like, I need to partner up with someone like that.
Well, that's exactly why we're doing it, because it is totally it's subversive, it's transgressive. We talk a lot about the sort of, Audre Lorde talks about the void of transgression in the place of creation and how we can subvert these paradigms. And just to go into what you were saying, I mean, there's a lot of things that landed for me. But one of them is that this is deeply rooted in, research and a long history of work that we've had. This is not just stuff that's made up, which is sometimes, I think, entrepreneurial spaces, same within the yoga world that I've been part of for so long, feel like stuff is just sometimes made up and thrown out there. And that's really concerning to me if it's not, rooted in deep research, analysis, statistics, theories, and then, then the application comes from that. So given our academic and activist backgrounds, like we're completely in alignment with having deep roots to what we're creating, having, a solid foundation, and at the same time, understanding that the spaces that we moved in for so long, as electrifying and as exciting as it was for both of us, and now, yes, I am speaking for both of us because we've had many conversations about it, as being academics, working with students, working within that system, being on the ground activists, there was so much constriction There was
Yes. Yep.
so much negativity. And listen, I want to be
Mm-hmm.
clear. I'm all about anger. I think that anger
Mm-hmm.
is a catalyzing emotion. I think it's essential. And if we can harness it,
Yep.
it can be incredibly productive. But I just started seeing how much people were shutting down, how even in my
Mm.
own life, becoming an academic in many ways shut down the full range of my creativity.
Mm.
Even thinking about a lot of the stuff that's happening within the realm of social movements where people are kind of attacking each other and tearing down the
Yeah.
walls of the movement. We wanted to offer something that was going to empower and mobilize, but from a different entry point. And that is increasing our joy capacity. How can we use that as a way to
Mm.
create both personal liberation as well as
Yep.
collective change? And
Yep.
that's always also been the crux of my work. Like, I have combined mindfulness practices with, the intellectual consciousness raising, pointing out that they need each other. We can't just have an
Mm-hmm.
intellectual understanding if we don't have the embodied sense of that new truth and if we don't
Mm.
have an
Yep.
application of that truth. And so we've done the same thing here is we're really using sort of an integrated system, a whole person integration. For me, I bring in the embodiment, the mindfulness. If people knew how to do this, they would do it. But how can we actually reprogram not only our minds, but our bodies? And I'm going to get a little woo.
Mm.
I'm going to say our energy fields, all of the things
Yep.
that
Yep.
we've collected. And so our goal is to offer this not as empty navel gazing, like I want to be happy. It's like, no, what
Mm.
when you can come into this place of joy, oftentimes in my tantric communities, I talk about when we come into the flow of pleasure and we can have that be a vehicle, we can expand. And a lot of the work I've done has been around empowerment from coaching, consulting, and my
Mm-hmm.
mentees and my students. Same thing. Now empowerment can come through joy. We can become larger, we can
Mm.
become bigger, we can hold more, we can contain more, we can feel more of a sense of balance and rest
Mm.
while being mobile, which makes this all much more sustainable. And
Yes.
then the end goal for both of us has always been community building, that our personal
Mm. Yep.
liberation is not just for us. Our
Nope.
personal liberation is for the good of the collective.
Yep. I love it.
And with Joy Rev, it's true. I mean, we're finishing our beta. We're offering, well, maybe I said it publicly now, but we're offering more next year. But I will say the next one in January is going to be a
Nice.
very hand curated, selected cohort of influencers to maximize the work in their platforms, and then it's going to be offered in other installations after that. And in many
Nice.
ways, we don't want this to just be some sort of an exclusive
Mm.
commodity. So
Yep.
we're looking at how we can bring this in to create curriculum and programs for nonprofit
Mm.
organizations. How
Yes.
can we bring this into the corporate world? There's so many different ways that this is happening, so that when I say from the bottom up and the top down, I mean that truly, that there are
Yep.
many different hubs, or I could say different spokes to this, one particular piece that we're doing. And it's exciting because to us, it just feels like the natural evolution of everything that we've done personally. And then when we
Mm.
came together, it was just so obvious our own joy capacity increased so
Mm.
exponentially that it was
Mm-hmm.
something that we understood very clearly we needed to share, that this was the
This
next,
is big.
yeah,
Yeah.
this was the
Yep.
next installation of our work.
I love it. It's so exciting.
It is super exciting.
I love this idea too of how we can imagine where it's heading. And it's like, I love that energy and flow that, yes, I very rarely got in academia. So there were moments in my dissertation, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
where you have that big moment where you're like, oh my God, I can see all of it. I feel like it happens way more frequently as an entrepreneur because we get to generate it in our own timeline and in a way that feels like, well, there's just so much opportunity too with every person you meet and every event you go to. And like you said, it is the creation comes out. It's almost like unleashed. And in academia, I wouldn't say it definitely doesn't not exist. It's definitely there, but it's funneled or walled off or siloed or made. And we try to find time for it, but all these other things take over. And you use the language electrifying. That's how I used to feel too. Yeah. When I'm in the classroom teaching, lecturing, doing an activity, whatever, electric, but everywhere else that I had to be, right? All other versions of myself that I had to show up as on campus, it wasn't that. not that being an entrepreneur means everything's perfect and amazing. It's just more like things are coming through me, and that electric energy I feel more often. So the idea that you guys are harnessing something like joy, right? And taking us to the place of when we feel those moments of electricity and joy and excitement and happiness and those lovely things that we feel, what I feel when I think of joy, harnessing that for productivity and moving forward. And because I also think too, in like activist work, there's so much burnout because there's so much giving and this conversation about depleting and feeling that energy of it feels like I can't change anything and I'm just going to keep working. That's a problem. That's a big problem. And so I love what you guys are doing. Like you're doing it in the business world, and then there's this larger vision, because this union, I think, of like the sociologist and the psychologist, of course, I love that too. But this union is like, oh yeah, this is like, because the institution it's a lot less likely that you're going to partner up with someone. I mean, the interdepartment stuff happens and it's happening more, but it's still not quite there. Right. And so in this space, you can just do it. Like there's no APA like coming after you or ASA coming after you or whatever. You're not answering to anyone. You guys are doing your work out in the world publicly.
Yeah. I mean, you were saying about that electrification. I mean, I'm getting ready to have some lightning bolts tattooed on me after the first of the year, because I use that emoji all the time with my clients, that it's like, it's about becoming electrified, basically becoming alive, allowing, whether you call it Shakti, source energy, universal energy, whatever it happens to be, but just to become fully alive. That is always what I felt in my classrooms. And I think that's what my students were most touched by, is the ways in which they became alive. And when I went into, my tenured position and there were these other spaces I had to occupy, I felt that being diminished. And I realized, that my talents and my energy and, my areas of mastery are better used elsewhere, that it would have been a waste of my talents and skill sets and what I bring to the world to be in those meetings and having those conversations. I wanted to stick with exactly what I know I do well, and that is to bring that out in people, to offer that in people, to model that for people. So there's that piece, which made it very clear that I needed to pivot in my work. And, just on a more personal level, Mark and I reminded each other that this is about the joy of being alive, that we only have so much time. And, he and I spent so many years just on our work with our clients, with our students, and then as parents, that I really felt like there was this one area of my life that was, atrophied, and coming together with him lit up this place that had been truly dead for so long. And when it opened up, my full capacity for creation through that, synergy of joy just blew me up even more. And I would say within a couple weeks of us being together, Joy Revolution just naturally came to fruition. And in such a short period of time, it's like the course has been created. We're working on a book. We have all of these, things happening, that this is what we want to offer others. Like, at the end of the day, what do you truly want to create? How do you want to feel satiated and fulfilled? And not as some, empty and kind of feel good mantra, but truly in the most spiritual and the most physical and the most deepest emotional sense that you can imagine, is about this is the source of our power when we become fully alive and fully self-actualized, and we bring it into our communities, into our workspace, whatever it is that we're doing. And I certainly know that my mission is to have more people come to that place, because then we as a collective benefit from their joy, from their sense of, being fully alive. And it's a beautiful thing. I mean, it is just incredibly beautiful to be able to do that, like you said, and not have limits, not to edit anything or to question anything, but just to go like, this is exactly what's meant to be, and let's make it. And then we have this limitless zone of creation, and we can make it look exactly the way we want to look. And I loved academia. I still do to a certain degree. Just in the role that I play now as a continued adjunct, or in my case, as an associate faculty member. I'm good with that. It gave me a wonderful framework for my life. It's allowed me to, inspire and be inspired by thousands of students over the years. And I have so much gratitude for that. But it just was clear that the message and the work that I've been doing, and as that work evolves, I felt compelled to bring it out to a much wider audience.
I love it, Melanie. So I know we're wrapping up. So, and I feel like we could end on that, but I do want to ask like one more question just to kind of drive it home for folks listening, especially if they're, I think with, how inspiring your interview is, just thinking about this idea of questioning where the joy is coming from and what life is looking like for us. So if someone is kind of in academia right now and is listening to this podcast and is kind of like, man, I want what she's drinking, or I want to hang out with this crew, right? What would you say to somebody who's maybe thinking of starting a side business or like going out more publicly? What would be your advice for them?
That's a great question. And it's going to be a little general, maybe a little esoteric.
Sure.
And the reason that I offer it this way is because part of the work that I do in, the empowerment coaching is I have no prescription, right? I don't want to give anyone a set curriculum or, a certain outcome, because that would be enabling. And for me, empowerment is about finding our authentic truth and having the courage to proclaim it, in the world. So just want to kind of, give that as a precursor. And for me, this is about the embodiment piece of it. It's like, I really encourage people to come into some kind of a mindfulness practice regularly enough that they can begin to create more space within themselves. Because if they can create more space, they have greater access to the truth of their desire, to the truth of who they're meant to be and the work that is supposed to flow through them. That if we are constantly inundating ourselves with messaging, not taking the time to be quiet, to be in nature, or to just be in that space of flow, we're not going to be able to have the clarity of that answer. And so I would say the first thing people should do is really come back into relationship with themselves by turning inward and being quiet.
I think that's excellent. It doesn't feel esoteric at all to me. Like it's true. It's like real.
Good.
Legit. Legit from Dr. Melanie Klein. Thank you so much for hanging out. I think we need to do a part 2. And I don't know what it's going to be on, but we're going to riff on a topic or something. I don't know.
I'm so glad you said that. And I didn't want to be the one to say that and be like, so have me back. Can I be like a repeat guest? But I really, I want to be. I think that there is a lot more here, and I'd be happy to offer it. In fact, if there's a bridge, I feel like there's a really clear bridge here for people who are maybe listening, who want to get more into the mindfulness component and the embodiment. In fact, the next book that I'm working on is called Embodied Resilience. And I think that for me, the biggest thing that changed my relationship to academia and activism was having the embodied component, the mindfulness component. And to me, they always went together. In my book, Yoga and Body Image, I talk about how, feminism freed my mind, but yoga freed my body. Yes. And they were one and the same. They were both about raising consciousness. And I needed to have the intellectual framework, and I needed to have the practice. They could not be separate. So I think that oftentimes when we, are in intellectual spaces and even a lot of activist spaces, these pursuits and these things become very heady. They become very intellectualized, and we lose sense of the physical container that we're in. We lose sense of the embodied wisdom that is coming through, or we doubt it, or we dismiss it. And so for me, I would love, if it appeals to you and your listeners, to come back and talk more about that bridge.
Would be awesome.
And coming into the fullness and the richness of our whole being.
Yeah. I think that's great, because I think, yes, in entrepreneurship and academia, I mean, so many places that we exist in society we're so divided in that. And it's about bringing that back together. Yes. Where can people find you? We're definitely going to have all your links, but where are you kind of hanging out right now on the interwebs?
Instagram is my jam. That is where I hang out the most. So I'm at Mel Klein. That's MELMELKLEIN. Obviously, that'll be in the links. My personal website is melanieclein.com. And then if people are interested in some of the intersections between mindfulness and empowerment. I'm also the co-founder of the Yoga and Body Image Coalition. That's all over the place. YBIcoalition.com, YBI Coalition on Instagram. So yeah, I'm pretty much hanging out all over the place, but I prefer Instagram. So I would love to hear from people. People can get some of my content there, and as other things come out, including this podcast, I always share all the latest in that particular space.
Sweet. So go find her. Go follow her right now. Awesome. Yes! Well, thank you, Melanie. I know you have to run, so we will have part 2. We will get it on the calendar. Take care. Thanks for coming by.